Hello, everyone. Welcome to WR Immigration's Chatting with Charlie EB5 Investor Outlook for August of 2025. We haven't spoken on this call for a couple of months because it's been summertime, but we have a lot to discuss today, and we're going to let everybody join in to this live webinar. If you're listening on YouTube, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for clicking in, and don't forget to subscribe. My name is Joey Barnett. I am a partner at WR Immigration. I've been doing EB5 for about 15 years. It's my principal area of practice. And I'm joined today by Charlie Oppenheim, who is our Director of Visa Consulting at WR Immigration. And Charlie, so great to see you and speak with you. I know you've been traveling a lot all around the world and getting those miles recently.
Yep.
So happy that you could be here because the Visa Bulletin is one of the big things that we're going to be talking about today, as well as the annual report that the State Department finally released for fiscal year 2024. Of course, this does not constitute legal advice. It's for information purposes only. But please feel free to reach out to us, visalaw@wolfstorff.com. My email is jbarnett@wolfstorff.com, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Already got questions coming up, which is great. So feel free to ask those, and let's get going right into it. WR Immigration, we are a great law firm. We are EB5 All-Stars. We do immigration only. We are consistently ranked as one of the best firms, and ChatGPT thinks we have one of the best EB5 teams in the world. I agree with it, and we'd be happy to help. Please journey forward with us. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. Oh my God, there's so much to talk about. So the Visa Bulletin. Charlie, this is the Visa Bulletin for August of 2025. I realize that we have a mix of people here on our call and listening in. We have people who really know what the Visa Bulletin is, who practice in EB5 on a daily basis. We also have folks who may not know what the Visa Bulletin is and what it does. So before we kind of dive into the nitty-gritty for this upcoming month, can you just give us a basic understanding of what the Visa Bulletin is and why it's important for an EB5 investor to be understanding?
Sure. Each month, the State Department will publish the Visa Bulletin for the upcoming month, and it indicates that based on the best information they had at that time, the amount of visas will be available in the upcoming month for applicants in each of the various preference categories and from their respective countries. When you see a date listed, for example, the China first preference where it says 15 November 2022, that means that only Chinese applicants with the first preference applicants with a priority date earlier than that November date are eligible to be processed during the month of August. So again, this is very important in the EB5 category for when you're looking at either the unreserved or the reserved categories. You want to look at what dates may or may not be listed there. And at this time, the only dates are for the fifth preference unreserved category for applicants born in either China or India.
Thank you. And I just want to point out that red arrow. We're going to see some arrows on some of our charts coming up here. That went backwards for EB2 for all chargeability. Can you explain what all chargeability means?
Yes, the all chargeability areas, sometimes referred to as rest of world, is applicants from countries other than the other four that are listed. So anybody that was not born in China, India, Mexico, or the Philippines would be subject to the dates listed in the all chargeability category. And we also do a general employment webinar on a monthly basis. And in that webinar earlier in the summer, when the rest of world all chargeability second preference date was advanced significantly, at that time, I thought that that significant movement was unnecessary and could have been slower and was likely to require corrective action later in the fiscal year. And we see that I was correct. There has been corrective action with a retrogression of the all chargeability second preference date.
Well, that's why we call you a wizard. See, only you would have been able to predict that, and glad to see that you're right. And I think you've also seen some things in EB5 that have happened over the past couple of months, which we're going to get into, that you also kind of called a few months back. But before we do that, I just want to note for the all chargeability rest of world for the four EB5 categories, that's current right now, meaning there is nothing stopping US consulates from scheduling interviews for anybody who has an approved I-526 abroad, unless you're born in China or India. The other thing I want to note is that the set aside categories, rural, high unemployment area, and infrastructure, all remain current as they have been since their existence in, what was that, May of 2022. But the big thing that I want to tell people here and what I tell on every single consultation is just because it's current today does not mean it will be current when your I-526 is approved. And that's what matters, because if a visa is not available at the time that your immigrant petition is approved, then they are not able to either schedule you for a consular interview if you're abroad or adjudicate your adjustment of status if you are here in the United States. So that is why we are always looking at the Visa Bulletin whenever it comes out. For the unreserved for chart A, I'm just going to scoot ahead to this slide here. There was a big retrogression earlier this fiscal year for China and for India, and now it seems like it's moved back forward. So what happened here?
I believe that there are two potential reasons. And I think this retrogression and the notes, which we'll cover later in the August bulletin, kind of indicate that in recent years, the final action dates, there's been a lot of unnecessary, in my opinion, unnecessary volatility in all of the employment final action dates, where they'll move ahead very quickly, retrogress, only to potentially, in some cases, move ahead again at a later point. And I think that that's what's happened here. I think the estimates that the State Department made when they retrogressed the China and India date in the April Visa Bulletin proved to be inaccurate. And therefore, they determined for August it was necessary to advance them significantly, as you can see, not so much for India, but a huge jump for China mainland born applicants.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, it was almost a 2-year jump.
Yeah, and what they had done when they retrogressed the dates in April back for both China and India, the reason for doing that, they were basically trying to stop future number use in those categories because they determined that the annual limits, the per country limits, which needed to be applied to both China mainland born and India, had been met or would be met and required the imposition of those dates at a very retrogressive basis. So again, the retrogressions basically was a line in the sand to stop future number use.
Yeah, it's bizarre to me because we have a number of EB5 investors with approved I-526s who are documentarily qualified, who are waiting for these consulates to schedule the interview. And it seems like the visa office was also waiting for them to schedule the interview so that they could use these numbers. And it just didn't happen over the past few months. And because of that, okay, well, now they have more numbers to use. And so let's give it to consulates that actually are scheduling. That's how I look at this, and it's a shame because we have a number of people who have invested their 500,000 or 800,000, who have created the jobs for US workers, who are eligible for these visas and are kind of just subject to some of this bureaucracy, which is very difficult. More than difficult, it's sort of against the intent of the law, which is to use all of the available visas every fiscal year.
Yeah, and I see two potential reasons for the dramatic change, the initial retrogression and now the movement. And the first is for whatever reason that the estimates the State Department had made regarding future number use for rest of world applicants, which required the April retrogression, were completely wrong, or and therefore they had to advance them again real quick to maximize number use under the overall limit, or since April, those who are responsible for determining the processing of cases at either the State Department or overseas office or USCIS offices in their determination of rest of world cases to be processed, decided to minimize the scheduling of final action on those rest of world cases, which resulted in a dramatic decline in rest of world number use, precipitating the need to move the China and India dates ahead because they knew there were plenty of such applicants who could be processed and again reach the unreserved annual limit for 2025.
I mean, I guess to some extent, we don't know. It's possible that they scheduled and then they said, "Hey, we're not ready to immigrate yet," right? I mean, that's possible to have happened as well. What about I think a lot of people here heard about the big reduction in force, the layoffs that the State Department did recently. Do you think that would have impacted these dates or any of the visa processing, to date? And what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't believe that any of the announced reduction in force would impact processing this fiscal year. It could have impact in the coming fiscal year, but again, I don't think it should have had any impact this year, especially given the amount the totals were not significant when you do it on a worldwide basis, and I believe much of the impact for State Department was on stateside employees. So again, to repeat myself, I don't think it really has any impact on this fiscal year, but it could next year.
And, it's always nice when the State Department gives us a little bit of extra notes about their thinking. And they did that for China and for India for unreserved. And I'm going to let you speak about, your thoughts on what this means and let people get a chance to read. I do want to note, though, that the unreserved category and the backlog that we've been talking about for the past 5-10 minutes has zero to do with new EB5 investors who are filing in the reserved categories, in particular Chinese and for Indians. Those are current in the Visa Bulletin, which allows you to file the adjustment of status if you're lawfully in the United States. We're going to be talking about what to expect on those in the second half of our call today. Right now, we're just talking about the pre-RIA or the investors who are not going in rural or high unemployment areas. So Charlie, what are your thoughts about what's going to happen with China and your thoughts about, this note in the Visa Bulletin?
Yeah, in terms of this note and the one they did regarding the India cases, as I mentioned, I feel there's two reasons, and I think this note here that it talks about their estimates basically that their estimates were incorrect. I'm not sure why they should not have had adequate statistical data and information to base their original decisions. And saying that the demand is down could actually provide them with cover for the second reason, which there has been an administrative decision to limit the number of cases being processed on a rest of world basis and scheduling of appointments at overseas posts. So they may not have wanted to say that. So this gives them a little bit of cover saying, putting it on the applicants themselves.
And do you think anything is going to happen in September's Visa Bulletin for China or India unreserved? Do you suspect any big changes or movements there?
No, as with the retrogression, which should have stopped all number use, the advancement of the August dates for China and India should have been done to a point where it would allow the overall unreserved limit to be maximized. And that is a definite issue with China, where there were thousands of applicants in the pipeline based on the last information with the State Department had published. There were about 5,000 or so with just 2015 priority dates. So again, I think both the India and the China notes are basically covering themselves.
I agree. I think there could be a little bit of gamesmanship going on here, but I'm really glad that you're keeping an eye on that type of thing because none of us know really what to be looking at when they're reading these things. So thank God we have you here. So we've been talking about unreserved. We're going to get into reserved next. The big point that I want people to understand is with these final action dates, it's really supply versus demand. And there is a limited amount of supply of visas every year, and there is an unknown amount of demand. And the reason why it's unknown, at least to the State Department, is because they only look at demand once USCIS approves the I-526E. And if USCIS is not adjudicating enough of them, then the demand will not exceed the supply. And until that happens, there will be no final action date, meaning the Visa Bulletin will remain current. But that does not consider, or I guess neglects to consider, the invisible backlog of cases that are filed by Indian and Chinese nationals in the reserve categories that are pending with USCIS that, if approved, can take up the next future years of visa supply. So we know it's there. I think the State Department knows it's there, but they're just not updating the Visa Bulletin to indicate that. But that is at least what I want you to have in the back of your mind, because a common question I get with EB5 investors that are looking to file today is, well, what do you mean there's going to be a backlog? It's current in the Visa Bulletin today. And I don't want to say that's not true, because they could still file the adjustment and there are benefits to that. But I don't think when their I-526 is approved, there will necessarily be a current final action date for them, or their priority date won't be current, and then they will be stuck in a backlog. So that's something that I want people to be considering when we go through Charlie's takeaways, which is what you guys have all been waiting for. So Charlie, why don't you take it away and give us your breakdown on what you think is going to be happening in the reserved visa categories for EB5?
Right. I think it's safe to say, and everybody should know, and we've been mentioning this for months, the three reserve categories will remain current for September, the last month of fiscal year. It's very unfortunate, as we'll see in some of the later slides showing the processing for fiscal 2024. This program has been in effect since, as you said, passed in March of 2022. So we're into the third fiscal year and we've got minimal number use, which is very unfortunate. We're basically wasting a lot of reserved numbers each year. But again, I think that we should be expecting that final action dates will be imposed in the future. And in a worst case scenario, final action dates would be, as it says, imposed for fiscal 2026 for the high unemployment and possibly rural reserved as early as October, which is the first month of the fiscal year. But I think that that's going to be very unlikely, because it would require a dramatic increase in the amount of approvals and processing. And we just haven't seen that at this point. And so there's no real reason to believe it would suddenly explode in terms of number use. For the next slide, in terms of the best case scenario, I don't think that the amount of processing will require final action dates before January of 2026 at the earliest. Again, there's no indication that would lead us to believe that there'll be enough numbers used during the period October through December, which would require the imposition of a date. And therefore, that's why I think that the best case scenario is the one the most likely to occur. As you mentioned, they should only impose a final action date when the amount of numbers which have already been used to that point, plus the amount of numbers expected to be used in the current and upcoming month, will exceed the per country limits or the worldwide limit. And again, that is not likely to occur before January of 26 in the three reserved categories. But as we mentioned, I believe in our last event, I think that once the fiscal 2026 final action dates are imposed, that eventually they will be for China, India, and rest of world. I think the key here is rest of world should expect a final action date to be imposed at some point during the latter part of fiscal 2026.
And so if that happens, and this is key here, does that mean that rest of world who file in reserved are not able then to move forward? Because there's this dual approval notice, right? And that would allow them potentially use the unreserved visa numbers and not be subject to any backlog. Isn't that right?
Yes, 100% correct. At some point, rest of world reserved applicants are going to make a decision to opt out of reserve processing and opt into unreserved processing because the unreserved final action date is current, meaning there are sufficient numbers available for all eligible applicants in that category. So again, I think that a lot of rest of world reserved applicants will be jumping ship and processing in unreserved at some point, and they'll make that decision in 2026 when it becomes to their advantage to do so.
Right. And that will then, of course, mean there's less unreserved visa numbers for the pre-RIA Chinese. And it's all circular, right? I mean, there's only a
Yeah.
certain number of visas that can be used every year. Okay, so I think this is really important to hear. We're probably not going to get much more information in the September Visa Bulletin. Is that right?
I wouldn't expect a lot of information other than I would not be surprised if the September Visa Bulletin indicates that the unreserved annual limit has been reached and that there may not be any additional numbers available in the month of September. Any applicants that are scheduled for overseas processing by the National Visa Center, if there were such an announcement, that should not impact that because for overseas case processing, when a case is scheduled, the visa office should have sent a visa number and to be available for the processing of that case, regardless of what happens subsequently.
Thank you. And so just to kind of summarize things, for an investor who is filing today from China or from India or from the rest of the world, you don't foresee a final action date in best case scenario and probably most realistic scenario through the end of this calendar year because USCIS just isn't adjudicating enough of the cases. Is that fair to say?
Correct. And again, that's based on historical data. We just have not seen either consular processing or USCIS processing at significant rates, which should require the imposition of a date during the first quarter of fiscal 2026, being October through December.
Yeah, I'm just looking at these on my phone here. I'm just looking at like the reserved adjudication data. And, I see on a quarterly basis somewhere around 250 to 300 applications only. That's not that many compared to the actual supply, which is in the thousands. So, all right, let us move forward because we are moving away now from Visa Bulletin world to the world of the Visa Office reports of 2024. They finally put the full thing out. In particular, this final table V, which relates to visas issued abroad and adjustment of status by USCIS. That's what shows the full amount of number use, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. So this here is for fiscal year 2024. Unreserved is on top, reserved is on bottom. Charlie, what do you take away here from the unreserved category? Do you like what you see?
Yes, here it shows that they maximize number use under the fiscal 2024 unreserved annual limit, which is exactly what should happen each year when the demand exceeds the supply. But unfortunately, the bottom chart of reserved is very discouraging in terms of the processing, with only 423 numbers being used when there were thousands available. And again, as I mentioned earlier, in 2024, they were in the second full fiscal year of the reserve program. At that time, there were already sufficient petitions having been filed to allow them to maximize number use, but that was not happening. Again, that is very detrimental because it not only prevents applicants from being processed then, it will slow the processing of applicants in the future because of people that could have been processed in fiscal 2024 or 25 and were not. They will be competing for numbers under the fiscal 26 limit, which again, this is a very unfortunate thing. And we saw this same occurrence in the early years of the pre-RIA processing of the original EB5 cases when Through about fiscal 2015, thousands of numbers were going unused on an annual basis, despite there being excessive demand, ultimately requiring the backlog of pre-RIA China cases.
which remains today.
Yes, and that would have been, although a backlog would have been required, the final action date, instead of being in 2015 as it is now, probably could have been easily in late 2016, early 2017, if processing had been occurring in a timely manner for the pre-RIA cases.
That being said, of the less than 15,000 Visa numbers that were given out in the EB5 category last year, over 2/3 of them went to China. I mean, just about,
Right.
right? So they're still getting more than anybody else, but I hear you. There was some problems back then, and it's still rearing its ugly head now for people who want to come based on their investment from 10 years ago. All right, so the next slide here that we have is a breakdown of the consulates that actually issued the reserve visas. Credit here goes to Suzanne at Lucid Blog Writing. There's a QR code. You should definitely check out her blog. It's required reading in EB5 as far as I'm concerned. So please take a look at that. And you can see the large majority of reserve visas were issued in China and India. Charlie, any thoughts here on this?
Unfortunately, it's depressing totals.
So now we're going to talk about the reserved limits, and this is from some of the questions that we got before the webinar. The way that it works in the RIA is that any unused reserve visas that are sort of created in a fiscal year, they carry over, if they're not used that fiscal year, they carry over to the reserve category the following year. If they're not used in that fiscal year, then they're carried over to the unreserved category. And what we have seen, because there was such small amount of reserve visas issued in 2024, that there were thousands, over 6,000, I believe, reserve visa numbers that were lost to EB5 reserved applicants forever. And I guess they could potentially use them in the unreserved category, for rest of world, but that's not what Congress intended, and certainly not what any of us want. And because of that, we are now able to kind of see what the actual annual limits are for reserved and unreserved. And for unreserved, the total limits that we have is in this blue column here on the right. That's how many Visa numbers are available this fiscal year in these reserve categories. And, what we're going to see is that once again, the State Department is nowhere close. Well, and USCIS we're nowhere close to being using all of them. And I should note that each one of these annual or these limits on the right are all subject, of course, to the 7% per country cap. Charlie, any thoughts?
No, accurately portrayed.
All right, this is interesting because we're going to be talking about, we were talking about this invisible backlog before, and this is data that USCIS released. It has to do with the number of adjustments that were filed in each fiscal year based on the reserve visa categories. Now, there can be multiple adjustments filed per I-526 petition because the investor, the spouse, and any unmarried children are included. But the interesting number that I want to point to here is in that bottom right-hand corner, which shows just based on those in the United States, there's 8,825 of these adjustments pending. We don't know if these are with folks that have approved I-526s or pending I-526s, but the fact is that they're in the pipeline. And when you look at the supply for fiscal year 2025, which is 7,663, well, just based on the number of cases that are pending at USCIS, it exceeds. We're not talking about all the cases at NVC or getting ready for scheduling overseas. So we are starting to see that this invisible backlog, the demand is certainly exceeding the supply.
Just one comment on this chart. prior to the RIA, the State Department overseas number use for the EB-5 program was overseas posts were probably using at least 85% of the numbers available in the pre-RIA. Now with the RIA, I think that the split is going to completely change. The fact that there, as you see, the 88-25 adjustments already, the number use is going to be at best a 50-50 split, and probably the adjustment of status number use is going to be much higher. And this is likely to create potential volatility in the movement and establishment of the reserved category final action dates, because the State Department may not have as good visibility into upcoming demand for numbers and when they'll be used.
Oh, that's a really good point because they're with USCIS and not with the consulates. All right, let's keep moving forward because we still got a number of slides. This has to do with the unreserved category fiscal 2025 visa use to date. I think there's around 11,720 or something along those lines of unreserved visa numbers in fiscal year 2025. Through May, they had used 8,400 of them. Charlie, what catches your attention here?
I think that the fact that Vietnam has used almost 1,300 numbers at this point in the fiscal year is somewhat alarming to me. The State Department has imposed both China and India unreserved final action dates in order to limit number use under the Immigration and Nationality Act guidelines, limiting them to 7% number use. Vietnam should have been subject to an approximately 825 annual limit for the unreserved employment numbers, yet they've almost used 1,300. This is very alarming to me. It is not really negatively impacting any rest of world applicants at this time, but if this were to happen again in fiscal 26 and beyond, this could negatively impact other applicants in the unreserved category. Especially, and those I'm talking about are reserved applicants who move into the unreserved category for processing.
And the pre-RIA Chinese that have earlier priority dates that, probably should be getting those visa numbers.
Exactly. This shows that there should have been at least 400 numbers at this point in the year that should have potentially gone to Chinese applicants. And again, this is concerning to me because the Immigration and Nationality guidelines are not being followed in the application of the per country limit to Vietnam.
So do you expect the unreserved annual limit then to be met? And I'm just saying, looking at this graph, you see the summer months, you see it gets much higher. You would suspect that's happening again in this fiscal year?
Yeah, again, I think that there's plenty of demand at both that could be processed at Guangzhou and in India to allow the annual limit to be maximized and unreserved. And if it's not, then this also calls into question the fact that the China and India dates were retrogressed in April and held until the August. This would be, if the annual limit is not reached, that would be,
Very, very frustrating for a lot
very
of clients.
frustrating.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Well, that actually gets to this great question that somebody asked is, what are your thoughts about for the unreserved India, backlog, so to speak? When do you think that will get cleared out?
I think that there is a good chance that based on the last data that the State Department released, and that was we obtained that in a release of May of 2024. At that time, it showed that during fiscal 25 and 26, the vast majority of the India or unreserved demand could be processed to conclusion in those 2 years. So I think that the India unreserved category is, should be in decent shape, and we have the potential to see that final action date for India unreserved advance in fiscal 2026.
Well, that's good to hear, and very good as well for Indian nationals in the reserve categories who may be able to opt in to the unreserved once it's current. All right, so we were talking about the unreserved category. Now we're going to talk about the reserved again. Oof, we were saying before there's over 7,000 of these things that are available this year, yet through May, we only have 568 of them have been used. We don't know the adjustments at this point, but I think we're going to be repeating a little bit of what we said. But Charlie, any thoughts here?
No, this is great reporting by IUSA. And again, as with Suzanne's totals, these are very discouraging when you're looking at the fact that we're, in the third year of the program and still having such low number use compared with the available numbers.
Right. Oh, definitely got to do a shout out to IIUSA and to Lee, who heads up their statistics department there. I don't know what they call it, but he does a great job. You definitely should scan the QR code. They have a great public facing dashboard that has all of this, which we just kind of cut and pasted from. So if you want to kind of take a look at it yourself, you got the QR code right there to look into. All right, this also gets to the invisible backlog mention that we noted before. This has to do with petitions that were filed. And if we assume that there's a certain number of applicants per petition, we really do see that, at least in the high unemployment category, you can see that it's significantly more in the pipeline than the actual supply. And so just something to keep an eye out on. Of course, there's a lot of assumptions that are built into this. And if there's I-526 denials, although that's pretty small these days, if there's dropouts or if there's deaths or divorces, things like that, age outs, although that isn't really an issue these days, those are reasons why that 2.3 may go down per petition. Charlie, any thoughts here?
No, just again, it's very unfortunate that more of these reserved applicants could not have been processed, at least in 24 and again this fiscal year, to maximize number use on the available numbers, which has not happened.
This is the last thing that I just wanted to bring up. Wow, I can't believe we made it through. I guess we talked a lot. Talked very quickly. This really just has to do with how many I-526s have been approved awaiting visa availability as of March of 2025. And so you see that pretty low number for India in the unreserved fifth category. I think that's sort of goes to what you were saying, is hopefully we can clear this thing out in the next year or two and get that down to zero.
We've talked about concurrent filing for applicants who are in the US and eligible to do so. I would encourage anybody who is not in the US and has not already taken advantage of concurrent filing to do so as quickly as possible while the final action dates are remaining current. Again, although I hope that my predictions on best case scenario are correct, there's no guarantee. They could State Department and USCIS could have a change in their processing strategy. So take advantage of the concurrent filing now if you can do so.
I love that. Oh, here's a question that's good. And although it hasn't happened recently, but it's sort of a general question about really the follow-up. What happens if there are unused visas in the unreserved category? What happens to those, Charlie?
If there are unreserved numbers, those would fall up for potential use in the employment first preference category. There is no carryover. The Reform and Integrity Act that was provided this carryover, that is not a carryover process that happens in the normal regular employment categories. So again, but as we saw for last year, they are using all of the unreserved numbers as they should, because there is excessive amount of demand. So there should be no numbers falling up to first preference.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know we got really kind of into the nitty gritty today, and it wasn't necessarily EB5 101, but we do have some recent webinars for prospective investors who want to learn more about the EB5 basics. We can put the links up here in our YouTube, but you definitely should check out our page there, WR Immigration. We are very busy with EB5. There's still a huge amount of demand because the current Visa Bulletin and the adjustment of status opportunity. And we'd be happy to help anybody who is interested in learning more. And if you ever have questions, you can reach out to us. Feel free to contact us anyway. visalaw@wolfsdorf.com. You can request consultations on our website if you want, if you don't want to talk to anybody. And again, here's my email address, jbarnett@wolfsdorf.com. We look forward to assisting you all and hope you have a great end of your summer. And you'll see us here when we do some teasers about what to expect in the upcoming fiscal year. So please feel free to join and subscribe and register for the next one. So thank you so much. Charlie, really invaluable stuff today. Thank you so much. And yes, stay cool.